The reception area of the city hospital greeted Caroline Reeves with its usual hustle and bustle. The end of December was unusually cold, and there was a steady stream of patients with frostbite. She quickly changed in the doctor's room, threw a white coat over her surgical scrubs, and took a sip of cold coffee from her thermos. She still had 8 hours left on her shift. "Dr. Reeves, there's a guy with frostbite who's refusing hospitalization." Nurse Donna peeked into the doctor's office. Caroline grimaced. She didn't like it when patients neglected their own health. A middle-aged homeless man was waiting for her in the examination room. He smelled of alcohol, but he was surprisingly upright and coherent. Caroline sat down next to him, carefully examining his blackened toes. "Mr. Jenkins, if you leave now, these toes will have to be amputated in a couple of days. You have severe frostbite," she said calmly but firmly. The man shook his head stubbornly. "Doc, I have a dog there. Who will feed her? She'll freeze without me." Caroline thought for a moment. "Where's your dog? I'll ask a social worker to check on her and bring her to a shelter while you're getting treatment. You can pick her up as soon as you're discharged." The patient looked at her suspiciously, but finally agreed to stay. Caroline quickly filled out the paperwork and made a few calls to animal control. "You're incorrigible," Donna smiled when Caroline returned to her post. "Always fussing over everyone." "Just doing my job," Caroline shrugged. She really tried to treat all patients with the same attention, regardless of their social status. Perhaps that was why her colleagues respected her, despite her relative youth. The next few hours passed in the usual rhythm: a broken bone after a fall on the ice, a couple of cases of the flu, another case of frostbite. Around midnight, a patient with a heart attack was admitted, and Caroline spent almost 3 hours in the operating room with the resuscitation team. Watching the elderly man being taken to intensive care, she remembered how she had met Brock. It was exactly 6 years ago, on a similarly frosty December evening. She had just started working at the hospital. Brock had been in an accident. His car had skidded on the slippery road. Fortunately, his injuries were not too serious: a concussion and a couple of bruises. He was in the hospital for only 3 days, but managed to charm the entire staff with his sense of humor and easygoing nature. Caroline smiled as she remembered how he invited her for coffee on the day he was discharged. She refused at first. Professional ethics did not encourage relationships with patients. But Brock was persistent. He sent flowers to the ward and accidentally ran into her after her shift. Eventually, she gave in, and a year and a half later they were married. It was almost 4 o'clock when Caroline finally sat down to fill out the paperwork. The reception area was unusually quiet, only the steady hum of equipment and the muffled voices of nurses at the desk. She didn't get home until 7 in the morning. She had to spend the last hour filling out medical records. The lights were on in the apartment, which meant Brock was already up. He usually started his workday early. She quietly opened the door. Brock was pacing around the living room with his phone, clearly engrossed in conversation. Caroline froze in the hallway, not wanting to disturb him, but something in his tone made her listen. He was speaking quietly, with a slight chuckle, and there was an unusual playful note in his voice. Noticing his wife, he quickly ended the conversation. "It was work," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "How was your shift?" "Fine," Caroline replied, taking off her coat. "Lots of frostbite. You're early today." "Yes, I have an important meeting at 9. Brock finished his coffee. "Go get some rest. I'll see you tonight." He quickly gathered his briefcase and left. Caroline stood in the empty kitchen for a moment, replaying his phone conversation in her head. Then she shook her head decisively. She was too tired to analyze his tone. After taking a shower, she got into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. The charity evening in support of the Children's Hospital was traditionally held in the banquet hall of the Richmond Hotel. Brock's company had been organizing this event for the 3rd year in a row, and Caroline knew how important the success of the evening was to her husband. She put on a dark blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion and pinned her hair up in an elegant bun. The hall was already crowded with doctors, representatives of charitable foundations, and businessmen with their wives. Brock immediately immersed himself in conversation with the guests, while Caroline stopped to talk to her colleagues from the pediatric ward. "Last year we raised almost $200,000 for new equipment," Dr. Fleming shared. "I hope today will be no less. We really need a new MRI machine." Caroline nodded absently, watching Brock talk animatedly with an unfamiliar woman at the bar. A tall blonde in a low-cut red dress kept touching his arm and throwing her head back as she laughed. "That's Delilah Hartnett," said Rachel Montgomery, a colleague from the intensive care unit, as if reading her mind. "I hear she recently opened a yoga studio somewhere downtown. Looks like she's looking for wealthy clients among the local crowd." Caroline deliberately turned away from the bar, trying to focus on the conversation about the new equipment. But out of the corner of her eye, she kept noticing Delilah standing next to Brock, asking him to take a picture of her with one of the guests or asking for advice on which cocktail to order. When the charity auction began, Caroline was finally able to distract herself. She watched the bidding closely. The hospital really needed a new MRI machine. But at some point, her attention was drawn to a ringing laugh. Delilah was standing next to Brock again, ostentatiously looking at the auction catalog over his shoulder. After the formal part, the dancing began. Caroline sat down at a table to catch her breath. She didn't immediately notice Melanie Abernethy sitting down next to her. "Tired?" her friend asked, handing her a glass of champagne. "A little. It's been a long week," Caroline said, gratefully accepting the glass. "That new girl is holding her own," Melanie remarked casually. "It's like she's known everyone here for 100 years. Caroline followed her gaze. Delilah was walking across the room, swaying her hips. Her red dress stood out brightly among the pastel dresses of the other guests. The evening ended after midnight. Brock was unusually quiet on the way home, probably tired. It wasn't until they got to their apartment that he spoke about the success of the event. "We raised even more than last year," he smiled contentedly as he loosened his tie. "And we made some new contacts. You know, that Delilah, she's surprisingly good at organizing events. She suggested some interesting ideas." "Really?" Caroline tried to keep her voice steady. "I noticed you were talking a lot." "Just work, honey," he pulled her closer. "She can recommend us to some big clients. Plus, she has a great sense of humor. Especially when she laughs at everything you say." The words slipped out before Caroline could stop them. Brock raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you jealous? Come on, we were just discussing business. She's a businesswoman looking for new contacts. Just normal networking." "Sure," Caroline said, walking away toward the bathroom. "I'm just tired." Later, lying awake, she replayed the events of the evening in her head. She had never felt jealous before. Her relationship with Brock had always been based on complete trust. But something about Delilah's behavior, the way Brock responded to her attention, made her feel uneasy. Caroline tried to push the thoughts away. After all, it was just one evening. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the steady breathing of her husband sleeping next to her. But even through her slumber, she was haunted by the sound of that same ringing laughter and the memory of the careless touch of manicured fingers on Brock's hand. January was unusually cold and gloomy. Caroline didn't immediately notice how their usual routine had changed. Work at the hospital took up too much of her time. But gradually, the small details began to form a bigger picture. Brock started coming home later and later. He used to arrive at around 7 in the evening, but now he rarely showed up before 9. He gave vague answers to questions. Lots of work, important meetings, new projects. And then something new appeared. He started going to the gym. "I've decided to take care of myself," he explained one morning at breakfast, spreading low-fat cream cheese on his toast instead of his usual butter. At our age, we need to watch our health. Caroline raised an eyebrow in surprise. In 6 years of marriage, Brock had never shown any interest in fitness. His only sporting interest was golf, and even that was only a couple of times a month. "At what age?" she tried to joke. "You're only 38. "Exactly," he finished his protein shake. "It's time to take care of myself before it's too late." Now he went to the gym 3 times a week, always in the evenings. He came back refreshed, smelling of expensive perfume, not the one she had given him for his birthday. His shirts were starting to fit a little looser, and there were several new suits in his wardrobe. On one of her rare days off, Caroline decided to have lunch with Rachel at her favorite cafe. It was a sunny day, and they chose a table by the window. Caroline was just telling Rachel about a complicated operation she had performed the day before when she heard a familiar voice. Delilah was sitting at the next table with 2 friends. They were chatting animatedly, oblivious to anyone around them, or rather, pretending not to notice. "He's so attentive." Delilah's voice was a little louder than necessary. "Can you believe he worked with me on stretching for almost an hour yesterday? He says I'm incredibly flexible." Her friends giggled knowingly. Caroline froze with her fork in her hand. "And his habit of always responding to messages with emojis is so cute," Delilah continued. "Just like a teenager. Who would have thought that such a playful personality was hidden beneath that serious suit?" Rachel gave her friend a meaningful look, but Caroline didn't seem to notice. She methodically cut her salad, trying to breathe evenly. "And his wife has no idea," one of Delilah's friends sighed with feigned sympathy. "Why not?" Delilah lowered her voice to a loud whisper. "I think she understands perfectly well. She's just pretending that everything is fine. It's typical behavior for her profession, always keeping up appearances." Caroline stood up abruptly. Rachel tried to hold her back, but she was already heading for the exit. The last thing she heard was Delilah's laughter. She returned home earlier than usual. To her surprise, Brock was also home, sitting in the living room with his laptop. "Why didn't you tell me you had a personal trainer?" Her voice sounded unusually sharp. Brock looked up from his screen in surprise. "Does it matter?" "It does, especially when that trainer is Delilah Hartnett." He slammed his laptop shut. "Are you following me?" "No. She made sure I found out. Today at the cafe, she was talking very loudly about your emojis in your messages and the specifics of your stretching routine." "Jesus, Caroline." He rubbed his nose wearily. "It's just training. She's really good at what she does, and if it bothers you, I pay her for her services." "Yes, I've noticed how professional she is, especially when she talks about you with her friends." "You're exaggerating. Maybe she was just joking." "Joking?" Caroline felt a wave of anger rising inside her. "So all these delays at work, your sudden love of fitness, your new perfume, those are jokes too?" "Stop it," his voice became harsh. "You're acting like a jealous schoolgirl. I'm just trying to get in shape and grow my business, and you're making a scene over nothing." "Over nothing?" She smiled bitterly. "You know, at least you used to try to lie convincingly." He stood up, clenching his fists. "I'm not going to discuss this. You're just tired and working yourself up. I have to go to practice." "Of course, you can't keep your trainer waiting," she said, turning away toward the window. "Say hi to your nice specialist." The front door slammed. Caroline slowly sank into a chair, feeling her hands tremble. In all their years of marriage, they had never argued like this. Even in those rare moments when disagreements arose, they had always been able to discuss things calmly. Now it was as if she were talking to a complete stranger. Melanie Ebernetti was famous for her dinners. She knew how to create a warm, almost family-like atmosphere even at formal events. Caroline usually enjoyed visiting their home, but today she had barely managed to get dressed and leave the house. After that argument, she and Brock had barely spoken, communicating only when necessary. Entering the spacious Abernathy living room, Caroline froze for a moment. Delilah was among the guests. She was sitting in an armchair with her legs crossed, talking animatedly to Marcus Abernathy. She was wearing a short emerald dress that accentuated her tanned skin. "Caroline, dear," Melanie hurried over to her friend. "Where's Brock?" "He's stuck at work. He'll be here later." Caroline tried to smile as naturally as possible. "Oh, I hope he's not too late. I made his favorite roast beef." Melanie led her friend to the bar. "The usual white wine?" Caroline nodded, trying not to look at Delilah. But Delilah, as if sensing her presence, raised her voice. "Did you know that proper breathing during yoga can work wonders? My clients say they feel like completely different people after class, especially the men. They discover so much about themselves." Caroline took a sip of wine. Fortunately, new guests arrived and everyone's attention shifted to them. Brock arrived half an hour later, when everyone was already seated at the table. He kissed Caroline on the cheek as if nothing had happened and sat down next to her. "Oh, Brock," Delilah waved at him across the table. "I was just telling her about the benefits of deep breathing. You can confirm that after our sessions you feel completely different, right?" Caroline sensed Brock tense up, but he quickly regained his composure. "Yes, the workouts really help me stay in shape. Especially one-on-one," Delilah smiled meaningfully, "when the trainer can give the client their undivided attention." An awkward pause hung over the table. Melanie hastily changed the subject, mentioning a new exhibition at the City Gallery. The conversation gradually livened up, but Caroline felt the other guests' scrutinizing glances on her. When dessert was served, she offered to help Melanie in the kitchen. She needed a break from the stifling atmosphere at the table. "I'm sorry," Melanie said quietly, taking out the dessert plates. "I didn't know Marcus invited her. She's consulting him on a project." "It's okay," Caroline said, dividing the cheesecake between the plates. "She's a businesswoman. She's looking for new contacts." "Carrie," Melanie put down the spatula and looked intently at her friend. "I know we've never interfered in your relationship with Brock, but maybe you should take a closer look at what's going on." "What's going on?" Caroline carefully decorated the dessert with fresh mint. "My husband has decided to take up a sport. He's got a new friend. Everything's fine." "You can see what she's doing." Melanie lowered her voice. "The hints, the looks. She's playing some kind of game. And Brock, he's changed lately." "I don't want to talk about it." Caroline picked up the tray with the plates. "Let's take the dessert out. The guests are waiting." But Melanie held her back by the arm. "Listen, I don't want to get involved, but I can see how much you're suffering. And that woman, there's something predatory about her. She won't stop until she gets what she wants." "And what do you suggest?" Caroline finally looked her friend in the eye. "Make a scene? Forbid your husband from going to practice? Track them down?" "No, of course not," Melanie shook her head. "Just be on your guard, and remember that you're not alone. Marcus and I are always on your side." When they returned to the dining room, Delilah was telling a funny story. Everyone was laughing, Brock the loudest. Caroline mechanically handed out dessert, Melanie's words about predators and prey ringing in her head. Well, maybe it was time to show that not all victims were so defenseless. The discovery happened by accident. Caroline never followed her husband or checked his phone. That Sunday morning, Brock was still asleep when his phone, lying on the kitchen table, vibrated. Caroline glanced at the screen mechanically. Maybe it was something urgent for work. "I miss your hands. Last night was amazing." Delilah's message appeared on top of the wallpaper with their wedding photo. Caroline froze with her coffee cup in her hand. Her throat went dry. The phone vibrated again. "Maybe we can meet up today? I have a surprise for you." She slowly put down her cup and sat down at the table. The phone lay in front of her like a time bomb. She could have just ignored the messages, pretended she hadn't seen anything. But something inside her broke. She knew the password. The day they met. Brock had never changed it. Her hands trembled as she opened the messages. There were dozens of them. Flirtatious, suggestive, explicit photos. "Good morning." Brock's voice made her jump. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. When he saw the phone in her hands, he froze. "How long has this been going on?" Caroline was surprised at how calm her voice sounded. "Carrie, don't call me that." She put the phone down on the table. "Just answer me. How long has this been going on?" He sank heavily into a chair opposite her. 2 months, but it's not what you think." "What do I think, Brock? That my husband is sleeping with another woman while I'm working the night shift? That he's lying to me about being late from work? That his workouts are just an excuse to meet her? Listen." He rubbed his face with his hands. "Yes, Delilah and there is something, but it doesn't mean anything. Just physical attraction, nothing more. I love you." "Physical attraction," Caroline smiled bitterly. "And that's why you text her in the middle of the night about how special she is. That's why you send her our family photos with comments about how you regret getting married." He looked up. "What? I never—" "No? Then what's this?" She opened a message from 2 weeks ago. "Look, your sweet correspondence about how cold I am and how I'm only focused on work, about how you don't feel passionate enough. Very touching." "I was drunk," he said, looking away. "It doesn't mean anything. Just stupid talk." "Silly talk." She stood up, feeling nauseous. "You know what's funny? I had a hunch. All these changes in your behavior, new clothes, perfume. But I kept believing that you weren't capable of such meanness." "Caroline, please." He tried to take her hand. "Let's talk calmly. I know I'm to blame, but we can fix this. I'll stop talking to her, find another gym." "Another gym?" She pulled her hand away. "Do you really think it's about the gym? God, Brock, I read your messages. All those plans for the future, talking about how you were going to live together. Do you really think I'm that naive?" "It's all her." He shook his head. "Delilah loves to make plans, to fantasize. I was just keeping the conversation going, but I never intended to—" "Never intended to what? Leave? Or just hoped I'd never find out?" Caroline picked up her cup of cold coffee. "You know what the worst part is? It's not the cheating itself. It's how you let her humiliate me. All her hints in front of our friends, her showy behavior. And you just stood there and watched." "I should have stopped her," he said, lowering his head. "I know, but it all got so complicated." "Spiraled." She put her cup in the sink. "Nice word. So irresponsible. As if it happened on its own, without your involvement." The phone vibrated again. They both looked at the screen. "I'll be waiting for you at 2. Don't be late, Tiger." "I'm not going," Brock said quickly. "I'll text her and tell her it's over. I swear, Caroline, I'll fix everything." "No." She headed for the door. "Go. Don't keep a lady waiting. Just don't take the engagement ring with you. It'll get in the way of your physical attraction." "Where are you going?" "To work. I'm on call." She paused in the doorway. "You know, Brock, you're right. I do work too much. But at least I'm not betraying those I supposedly love." It was always easier at the hospital. The work required complete concentration, leaving no room for personal feelings. Caroline immersed herself in the familiar rhythm of shifts, surgeries, and rounds. Her colleagues delicately ignored her reddened eyes and uncharacteristic silence. A difficult patient was admitted to the ward, a middle-aged man with a massive heart attack. The operation lasted almost 6 hours. Caroline stood at the operating table, methodically performing the most complex procedures, and for once her thoughts were occupied only with her work. "Heart rate stabilizing," the nurse announced the monitor readings. "Blood pressure returning to normal." After the operation, Caroline sat in the doctor's office for a long time, filling out paperwork. It was already dark outside, but she didn't want to go home. Only emptiness and memories awaited her there. In the morning, she went to her favorite coffee shop near the hospital. She froze at the door. Delilah was sitting at a table by the window. Noticing Caroline, she waved cheerfully as if she were an old friend. "Caroline, dear, what a surprise. Will you join us?" Without answering, Caroline turned toward the exit. She could buy coffee somewhere else, but Delilah's voice caught up with her at the door. "You know, he's not going to stay with you anyway. Men need passion, not a schedule." That same day, Delilah showed up at the supermarket where Caroline usually shopped, then at the dry cleaners, at the restaurant where she and Rachel had agreed to have dinner, as if by accident, but always impeccably dressed and ready for a grand entrance. "This is getting out of hand," Rachel said indignantly. "Is she following you?" Caroline shrugged. "I guess the town is too small for both of us." In the evening, Brock called. He called every day, but Caroline usually ignored his calls. For some reason, she answered today. "I've ended it," he said instead of saying hello. "I talked to Delilah. I explained that it's over between us." How did she react? Caroline tried to sound calm. "Fine. She said she understood." He paused. "Caroline, would you like to have dinner together? Talk? About what? About how she happens to be everywhere I go? Or about what an insensitive workaholic I am?" "What? Is she stalking you?" "Don't pretend you don't know." Caroline rubbed her eyes wearily. "It's part of your game, isn't it? To show me how bright and free she is. Unlike me?" "I swear I had nothing to do with it," he said, sounding alarmed. "I really broke up with her. I asked her to stay away from both of us." "Away?" Caroline smiled bitterly. "She was at my coffee shop today, yesterday at the supermarket, the day before yesterday." "I'll talk to her," he interrupted. "I'll make her stop." "Don't bother." She glanced at her watch. "I have to get to work. And Brock, don't call me anymore, please." New patients were waiting for her at the hospital. The man who had had a heart attack was recovering. He could already sit up and talk a little. His wife brought him food from home and sat by his side for hours. They held hands and talked about everyday things. Caroline watched them during her rounds and thought about how fragile things that seem unbreakable can be. In the evening, a nurse handed her a bouquet of flowers. "From your husband," she explained. A note was attached to the bouquet. "I'm sorry. I'll fix everything. I love you." Caroline gave the flowers to the children's ward. Let them cheer up the little patients. They need them more. And she needed to work, to save lives, to do what she did best. The rest could be endured. Even if every morning began with the fear of encountering a woman in a bright dress with the same winning smile in familiar places. The invitation to Gerald Harper's anniversary party came at an inopportune moment. Caroline was just trying to come up with a polite excuse to avoid social events in the near future. But it was impossible to turn down the Harpers. The families had been friends for over 5 years, and Gerald was one of the main sponsors of the children's ward at the hospital. She chose a simple dark blue dress and styled her hair in a low-key hairstyle. No bright jewelry or makeup, just a thin layer of foundation to hide the signs of fatigue. Brock was supposed to arrive separately. He sent a message saying he was delayed at work. The Harper mansion was aglow with lights. Elegant guests slowly ascended the wide staircase, greeting each other. Caroline greeted the hosts, presented the birthday boy with a gift, a rare edition of his favorite author, and headed for the bar. A glass of wine would help her get through the evening. Brock appeared half an hour later, alone. Caroline felt her inner tension ease a little. Perhaps the evening would be peaceful after all. He nodded to her from afar and joined a group of businessmen discussing some new project. And then Delilah entered the room. She was wearing a red dress with an open back, her hair styled in large waves. She carried herself as if she were the guest of honor, not an uninvited visitor. "Who invited this woman?" Melanie whispered, appearing next to Caroline. "I know for a fact that the Harpers didn't invite her." "What does it matter?" Caroline took a sip of wine. "She shows up everywhere she wants to these days." Delilah had already found Brock. She was literally hanging on his arm, talking animatedly. He looked embarrassed but didn't pull away. "Honey, you left your tie at my place." Her voice was loud enough for those standing nearby to hear. "The gray striped one. I brought it with me." Caroline felt sympathetic glances directed at her. Melanie squeezed her elbow tighter. "Should we leave?" "No." She straightened her shoulders. "These are my husband's friends. I have a right to be here." The evening turned into a subtle form of torture. Delilah seemed to deliberately stay within Caroline's field of vision, touching Brock demonstratively and laughing loudly at his jokes. He tried to leave several times, but she always found an excuse to keep him there. "Brock, dear, remember that restaurant we went to last week?" Her voice rang out across the room again. "We have to go back there again. They have amazing desserts." Last week. So Brock had lied about ending the relationship. Caroline downed her wine and headed for the exit. Emily Harper caught up with her in the lobby. "Don't leave," she pleaded. "These are your friends, your social circle. Don't let her ruin everything." "I'm just tired, Emily." Caroline smiled stiffly. "I have to get up early for work tomorrow." "You know," Emily lowered her voice, "Gerald has already ordered her to be escorted out. No one gave her permission to come without an invitation." "Don't make a scene," Caroline shook her head. "Let her have her fun. After all, she has something to celebrate. She got what she wanted." "What does Brock want?" Emily asked suddenly. "Have you talked to him?" "About what?" "About how he spends his time in restaurants with his mistress while swearing to me that it's over?" Caroline rubbed her temples wearily. "You know, the funny thing is, I really believed he wanted to make things right." At that moment, Delilah's ringing laughter came from the hall. Caroline headed resolutely for the exit. She had had a difficult week and had a complicated operation tomorrow. And these games, let them play without her. She had tried too long to keep up appearances, to pretend that everything was fine. Enough. Near her house, she found several missed calls from Brock. She ignored them. If he wanted to explain, he could do it in person. Although what was there to explain? Everything was crystal clear. A woman with severe food poisoning was brought to the emergency room. Nothing serious. The usual story of spoiled seafood at a restaurant. Caroline ordered an IV and was about to leave when the patient suddenly grabbed her arm. "Wait, you're Caroline Reeves, aren't you? Brock's wife?" Caroline wanted to correct her, ex-wife, but kept quiet. The woman sat up in bed. "I'm sorry to be so abrupt. I'm Samantha Wells. I used to teach yoga at Delilah's studio." Caroline instinctively pulled her hand away, but Samantha wouldn't let go. "Please listen to me. I have something to tell you." The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the IV drip. Samantha spoke softly, pausing often to catch her breath. "I worked with Delilah for 2 years. We even became friends, as much as you can be friends with her. She has a way of charming people, of winning them over, especially men." Caroline sat down on a chair next to the bed. Samantha smiled bitterly. "First there was James Porter, a successful lawyer, married for 20 years, 2 children. Delilah met his wife in class and asked to come to a family dinner. A month later, he left his family. True, he came back 6 months later, when he realized that Delilah was just using him to get connections in certain circles." She paused, staring at the IV drip. "Then there was Michael Sterling, also married, also successful. History repeated itself. Delilah always follows the same pattern. First, chance encounters, then flirting in front of his wife, and finally, demonstrative behavior. She enjoys humiliating other women and showing her power." "Why are you telling me this?" Caroline asked quietly. "Because I've seen families destroyed, how people suffer. And every time Delilah came out unscathed, the men returned to their wives, but the relationships were already destroyed, and she found a new target. Samantha closed her eyes. You know what's the scariest thing? She's not doing it for money or social status. She just enjoys the process, the hunt, the chase, the victory. And then she loses interest and starts all over again. Why did you leave the studio? Because of David. He was my fiancé. We were going to get married, Samantha swallowed. Delilah seduced him a week before the wedding, just because she could. And then she laughed and said she did me a favor, showed me his true colors. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. A nurse was making her rounds. Samantha hurried. Listen, I know it's none of my business, but I've seen you with your husband before, at charity events, at restaurants. You were happy. Don't let her ruin everything. It's too late, Caroline stood up. Brock has made his choice. No, you don't understand. Samantha tried to sit up straighter. Delilah won't stop until she's sure she's completely destroyed your relationship. It's not enough for her to steal your husband. She needs public humiliation, scandal, drama. I've seen it 3 times before. What do you suggest? I don't know. Samantha leaned back against the pillows. Just be ready. She'll think of something dramatic, something public. She needs an audience for the final act. Caroline checked the IV. Rest. You'll be discharged in the morning. She stepped out into the hallway, but Samantha's words lingered in her mind. 3 times, 3 broken families, and now it was her turn to become a trophy in Delilah's collection. Brock's message flashed on her phone again. We need to talk. I'll explain everything. Caroline deleted the message without opening it. Samantha was right. This wasn't the end. Delilah was preparing something special, some final chord in her symphony of destruction. Well, let her prepare. At least now the rules of the game were clear. Brock picked up his things on Thursday. He came in the afternoon when Caroline was at work. She had suggested it herself to avoid any unnecessary conversations. When she got home, she found empty shelves in the closet and a note on the kitchen table. I'll be staying with Marcus for now. I'll leave the keys with the concierge. The apartment seemed unusually spacious without his things. His favorite mug with the sports team logo was gone, as was his laptop, which usually sat on the coffee table, and the chargers that were always scattered around all the outlets. The shelf in the bathroom where his shaving kit and cologne had been was empty. Caroline methodically removed the remaining traces of his presence. She put their photos together in a box, hid his gifts in the closet, and changed the bedding. She threw away his favorite tea and cookies, which he always kept in the top cabinet. The house gradually became just a place to sleep and eat occasionally between shifts. Work saved her. Caroline took extra shifts, stayed late poring over medical records, volunteered to fill in for colleagues. In the operating room, bent over her next patient, she felt at home. Everything was clear and logical here. Rachel tried to shake her out of it, to get her out of the hospital. But Caroline found excuses to refuse. An emergency surgery, a complicated case that needed monitoring. In reality, she was just afraid of running into Delilah, who seemed determined to cement her victory. Now she could be found anywhere she and Brock used to go, their favorite restaurant, the cafe near his office, the shops where they usually shopped, and everywhere she loudly discussed her relationship with Brock, as if deliberately drawing attention to herself. And Brock says, Brock and I are planning. When Brock moves in with me. Her voice followed Caroline even to places she had never been before. It seemed as if the whole city had turned into a stage where Delilah was performing her show. She was at the beauty salon, said Melanie, who had stopped by to check on her friend. She spent an hour talking about how she and Brock were going to spend their vacation in the Maldives, and that he had finally met a woman who understood his needs. Caroline silently laid out the sterile instruments. Melanie gently touched her shoulder. You can't hide here forever. This is your town, your friends. You can't let her take over your territory." "What difference does it make now?" Caroline shrugged. "Let her say what she wants. It's none of my business anymore." But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Every story about Delilah's adventures with Brock, every tale of their plans for the future, struck a painful chord inside her. 6 years of living together couldn't just disappear, dissolve into a stream of gossip and rumors. Brock sometimes sent messages, short, almost businesslike. He asked about the cat they had once taken from the shelter. He asked if she needed help paying the bills. Caroline replied in monosyllables, trying not to keep the conversation going. Meanwhile, Delilah continued her triumphant march through the city. She joined the same fitness club where Caroline used to work out. She started showing up at the hospital's charity committee. She even tried to organize yoga classes for the staff. Fortunately, the administration rejected the idea. "She's marking her territory," Rachel remarked grimly when she and Caroline ran into Delilah again. "Like a predator. She won't rest until she's sure she's won." "Then let her think she's won," Caroline said, picking up another medical file. "I have more important things to do." Marcus Abernathy's birthday had always been the event of the season. Despite recent events, Caroline couldn't miss the party. They had been friends for too long. Besides, Melanie had come to pick her up personally and wouldn't take no for an answer. The entire cream of society had gathered in the large hall of the Amberley restaurant. Marcus stood in the center, accepting congratulations while Melanie bustled around him, making sure all the guests were comfortable. Brock arrived alone, and Caroline felt a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps Delilah's words about their life together were more fantasy than truth. The first hour passed relatively calmly. Caroline kept her distance from her ex-husband, chatting with old acquaintances. Delilah showed up later when the party was in full swing. She had clearly had a few drinks before arriving. Her gait was a little less steady than usual, and her laughter sounded too loud. "Honey!" She rushed over to Brock, nearly knocking over the waiter's tray. "I missed you so much." Brock gently pulled away, glancing quickly at Caroline. Delilah followed his gaze and smiled. "Ah, our ice queen is here too. How nice." Caroline pretended not to hear, continuing her conversation with Emily Harper. But Delilah seemed to have other ideas. She headed straight for them, swaying on her high heels. "You know, dear," she said, standing directly in front of Caroline, "I've been meaning to tell you something. You're so proper, so professional, all those surgeries, lives saved. But you didn't even notice when you lost your own husband." The room fell silent. Brock started to move toward them, but Delilah continued, raising her voice. "He was suffocating next to you. He needed a real woman, not a walking schedule." Caroline stared silently into her glass. Delilah leaned forward, almost losing her balance. "And you know what's funny? You're still wearing your wedding ring. Why? He's not yours anymore." It all happened very quickly. Delilah grabbed Caroline's hand, pulled the ring off her finger, and, staggering, headed for the open window. "Now your husband is truly free." She swung her arm and threw the ring into the darkness. For a second there was dead silence in the room. Then Delilah turned to Brock. "Come to me, honey. Now we can be together officially." She leaned in to kiss him, but then something unexpected happened. Caroline, who had learned to act quickly and decisively during her years working in intensive care, took 2 swift steps forward. One precise blow with her elbow to Delilah's solar plexus, and Delilah doubled over, gasping for air. "I'm sorry." Caroline's voice sounded calm and professional. Professional reflex. In intensive care, we often have to deal with violent patients. Delilah tried to straighten up, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She sank to the floor, clutching her stomach. "You?" She was choking with rage and pain. "You need to breathe deeper," Caroline advised, still calm. "And maybe you should drink less. Alcohol affects your coordination." Brock lunged to help Delilah, but froze when he met his ex-wife's gaze. Caroline had already turned to the hosts. "Marcus, Melanie, I'm sorry for the trouble. I think I'd better go." She calmly picked up her purse and headed for the exit. Delilah's curses flew after her, but she didn't turn around. After what had happened at the restaurant, Caroline expected serious consequences. A call from the chief physician, complaints from Delilah, gossip among the staff. But life in the hospital went on as usual. Patients were admitted and discharged, operations followed one after another, and shifts were replaced by days off. The weather turned bad. Cold rain set in, and people with pneumonia were increasingly brought to the emergency room. Caroline spent long hours in the intensive care unit, monitoring IVs and monitors. At such moments, the rest of the world seemed to cease to exist. There was only the beeping of machines, the patter of raindrops on the window, and the quiet breathing of patients. Her small office on the third floor became a real refuge. Here, she could drink her coffee in peace, look through medical records, and think. Sometimes Rachel would drop in, bringing sandwiches from the cafeteria and telling her the latest hospital news. She didn't try to talk about what had happened, and Caroline was grateful to her friend for her silent understanding. On one such rainy evening, she stayed late after her shift, sorting through documents. It was already dark outside when there was a knock at the door. Brock was standing on the threshold, his raincoat wet, raindrops in his hair. Caroline felt a strange calmness. There was no anger or resentment, just a slight fatigue and a desire to end the conversation as quickly as possible. She silently pointed to the visitor's chair and continued filling out the patient's chart. He said something about mistakes and forgiveness, about a new beginning, about his feelings. The words were right, but they sounded like lines from a mediocre melodrama. And Caroline thought of the elderly patient in room 7 who waited every day for her husband. He came in all kinds of weather, brought her favorite fruits and fresh magazines, just sat there holding her hand. Those were real feelings that didn't need loud words. "That's enough," she interrupted him mid-sentence. "I'll file for divorce. Your lawyer can contact mine." He tried to object, but she had already returned to her papers. An urgent call sounded in the hallway. Her help was needed somewhere. Caroline quickly gathered the necessary instruments and left, pulling on her medical gown as she went. Brock remained sitting in the empty office. Then there was a long operation, then rounds, then a new admission. The usual hospital routine, saving in its predictability. She returned home well after midnight, wet, tired, but strangely peaceful. For once, she didn't feel like analyzing what had happened or thinking about the future. She just wanted to go to bed and start a new day tomorrow. Several messages flashed on her answering machine, but she didn't bother to listen to them. Instead, she stood under the hot shower for a long time, washing away the hospital smells and fatigue. And then, for the first time in a long time, she fell asleep soundly without sleeping pills. More than 2 weeks had passed since the scandal at the restaurant when Delilah began to show up near the hospital. At first, she just stood at the entrance, attracting attention with her bright makeup and flashy clothes. Then she started coming into the hospital cafe where Caroline usually had lunch. The nurses whispered that she was deliberately asking about Dr. Reeves's schedule. A couple of times she even tried to make an appointment, even though it was the emergency room where they didn't take appointments. Caroline tried not to pay attention to these demonstrative appearances. She had more important things to worry about: a complicated heart valve replacement surgery, consultations with out-of-town specialists, new patients. But Delilah became more and more persistent. One morning, Caroline found a bouquet of wilted roses on the windshield of her car. Another time, someone spilled coffee on her scrubs, which she had left in the resident's office. These were minor incidents, each of which could be chalked up to chance, but their frequency was alarming. Rachel noticed something was wrong when she saw Caroline change her route yet again to avoid running into Delilah in the hallway. "This is getting out of hand," she said, dragging her friend into an empty examination room. "How long are you going to run from that lunatic?" Caroline sat down wearily on the couch. "I'm not running. I'm just trying to avoid unnecessary encounters." "Unnecessary encounters?" Rachel snorted indignantly. "She's blatantly stalking you. That's called stalking, by the way." At that moment, the door opened slightly and a familiar blonde head appeared in the doorway. Delilah feigned surprise. "Oh, excuse me. I was looking for the reception desk. Dr. Reeves, could you tell me where it is?" Rachel spun around quickly. "The reception desk is on the first floor. This is the staff and patient area. Should I call security?" Delilah narrowed her eyes. "We're so scary. Can't your friend speak for herself?" "She can," Rachel said, stepping toward the door. "But she doesn't waste her time talking to mentally unstable people. The exit is the same way you came in, straight ahead and to the left." When the door slammed shut, Caroline whispered, "That was unnecessary. Now she won't calm down." "Let her try," Rachel said firmly, taking out her phone. "I already spoke to the head of security. He'll install additional cameras at the service entrance and in the parking lot. And he warned security not to let her into the building without a valid reason." "Rachel, don't even argue," her friend raised her hand. "I've been working in emergency medicine for 20 years. I've seen all kinds of crazy people. That woman is clearly not right in the head. Normal people don't behave like that." Over the next few days, Rachel turned into a bodyguard. She rearranged her shifts to fit Caroline's schedule, organized a secret surveillance among the nurses, and arranged with the parking attendant to keep an eye on her friend's car. Delilah continued her attempts to provoke a conflict. She would accidentally bump into Caroline at the supermarket or loudly discuss her personal life with her friends at a cafe across from the hospital. Once she even tried to sign up as a volunteer in the children's ward, but was flatly refused. "You know what's the saddest thing?" Rachel remarked one day, looking out of the resident's office window at Delilah pacing in the parking lot. "She thinks she looks like a femme fatale, some kind of winner, but in reality, she's just a pathetic stalker." Caroline said nothing. She remembered Samantha's story about Delilah's other victims, about her pathological need to humiliate and destroy. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe it really was a pathology that required treatment, not just malicious intent. At the end of the week, Delilah put on another show, arriving at the emergency room with alleged acute abdominal pain. But she didn't count on Rachel being on duty. "Oh, we have a case of hysterical neurosis here," she announced loudly after glancing at the chart. "I recommend seeing a psychiatrist. I can give you a referral." After that incident, Delilah began to show up less often. Perhaps she realized the futility of her attempts, or maybe she was just looking for a new way to annoy people. But Caroline was grateful to her friend for her support. Sometimes you just need to know that you're not alone in facing someone else's madness. The turning point came at another charity evening in support of the children's ward at the hospital. Brock, as the organizer of the event, couldn't not attend. Caroline came too. After all, it was related to her work, not her personal life. Delilah appeared in the middle of the official part of the event, interrupting the main sponsor's speech with a loud greeting. She clearly smelled of alcohol and was unsteady on her feet. Brock, standing by the stage, visibly tensed. "Honey, you didn't tell me about this wonderful event." She tried to hang on his neck, but he pulled away. "Delilah, you're drunk. You'd better leave." "Leave?" She raised her voice. "Why? I have a right to be here. I'm your woman." The audience looked away in embarrassment. The sponsor on stage fell silent. Brock turned pale and took Delilah firmly by the elbow. "Let's go. We need to talk." They went out into the foyer, but their voices could still be heard through the slightly ajar door. "This is too much." Brock's voice sounded tired. You're ruining an important event, damaging my reputation. Your reputation? She laughed hysterically. What about my reputation? You promised we'd be together, that you'd divorce that ice queen. I never promised that. His voice hardened. You made up those promises, and I'm tired of your fantasies, of the stalking, the hysterics, the constant provocation. Oh, really? She raised her voice again. So I made it all up? What about our meetings, your declarations of love, our plans for the future? Enough, he cut her off. It was a mistake. I got confused. I behaved like a complete idiot, but it won't happen again. It's over. Nothing is over. She was almost shouting. You can't just take me and leave me like this. I won't let you. Delilah, his voice became harsh. Stop this hysterics. You're behaving irrationally. You're stalking my wife, causing a scene in public, disrupting business events. This has to stop. Or else what? She tried to grab his arm. What will you do? I'll call the police, he replied calmly. I have plenty of witnesses to your inappropriate behavior, and I also have the hospital's surveillance footage. Silence hung in the foyer. Then there was the sound of a slap and the click of heels on the marble floor. The front door slammed. When Brock returned to the hall, there was a red mark on his cheek from the blow. He took the stage and apologized for the incident. The event continued, but the atmosphere remained tense. Later that evening, he approached Caroline. I'm sorry for all of this, the circus, and for not stopping him earlier. She nodded silently. No explanation was necessary. She had heard everything herself. The next day, Delilah began sending him endless messages. She called at night. She waited outside his office. Now he was experiencing what Caroline had gone through. She's threatening to tell my clients all kinds of lies, he complained when they ran into each other at the supermarket. She says she'll ruin my business. Go to the police, Caroline advised. You suggested that yourself. He shook his head. I hope she calms down on her own. She has to understand. She hasn't understood all this time. Caroline shrugged. And she probably never will. People like that don't stop until you stop them. She turned the cart toward the checkout, leaving her ex-husband standing there, lost in thought, staring at the shelves of canned goods. Well, now it was his turn to learn how to deal with the consequences of his own mistakes. It happened on a typical workday at the hospital. Caroline was just finishing her rounds when Delilah literally burst into the ward. She was wearing an evening dress, completely inappropriate for a hospital, her makeup smeared, and she was holding some papers in her hands. Here! She waved the sheets in front of the stunned nurses. Here's the proof. She's faking medical records. She's taking bribes. I know everything. Caroline calmly left the ward, carefully closing the door behind her so as not to disturb the patients. Delilah, noticing her, literally rushed towards her. You thought you were so righteous, but I found out everything about you. Here, look. She waved some papers with clearly fake stamps. The nurses and doctors in the hallway froze, watching the scene. Caroline looked closely at Delilah. Dilated pupils, trembling hands, incoherent speech. Her professional eye immediately noticed all the signs. Tina, she said quietly to the head nurse, please call the psychiatric team and security, just in case. What? Delilah laughed in a frighteningly high-pitched voice. You think you can lock me up? I know everything about you. You broke up Brock and me on purpose. You brainwashed him. She began to rush around the hallway, waving papers and shouting accusations. Patients peered out of their rooms in fear. Colleagues, Caroline said, still calm, please return to your duties. I'll handle this. Delilah suddenly stopped and pointed at her with a trembling finger. And you tried to kill me. Back then in the restaurant. I barely survived. Caroline heard the security guards approaching and talking quietly on their walkie-talkies. Delilah was now pacing the hallway, muttering something under her breath and occasionally bursting into hysterical laughter. The psychiatric team arrived surprisingly quickly. The young doctor glanced at the situation and immediately understood what was going on. "Acute psychotic episode," he said quietly to Caroline. "How long has she been like this?" "As far as I know, she's been exhibiting signs of unstable behavior for several months," she said, briefly describing the situation. "Persecution, obsessive thoughts, mood swings. Today, there's been a clear escalation." Delilah, noticing the people in white coats, tried to run away, but the guards carefully blocked the exit. "You're all in on it," she shouted. "This is a conspiracy. She bribed everyone." The team acted professionally. Within a few minutes, Delilah was sitting on a stretcher, having been given a sedative. Her muttering gradually became quieter. "We're admitting her to the psychiatric ward," said the doctor. "She obviously needs serious help." Caroline nodded and headed for the nurse's station. She had to arrange for the hallway to be cleaned and calm the agitated patients. The day went on, and there was work to be done. In the evening, Brock called. He had already been informed of what had happened. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm fine," she replied. "Just doing my job." The next day, everyone at the hospital was talking about what had happened, but Caroline refused to discuss it with anyone. She was a doctor and knew that a person in a state of psychosis needed help, not judgment, even if that person had hurt you. Spring came again. The divorce was finalized quickly and without unnecessary arguments. Brock agreed to all of Caroline's terms. Delilah was still in the clinic. The doctors diagnosed her with manic psychotic disorder and prescribed long-term treatment. The city gradually returned to its normal life. The gossip died down, finding new topics for discussion. Caroline threw herself into her work. A new cardiology department had opened at the hospital, and she was offered the position of head of the department. One day in April, she ran into Brock at the supermarket. He looked haggard and lost. He tried to walk past, pretending not to notice, but then stopped. "Would you like to get a coffee?" he asked uncertainly. "Just to talk." They settled into a small coffee shop nearby. Brock twirled his cup in his hands for a long time, searching for the right words. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about everything. About how easy it is to destroy what you've built over the years. How I let someone else's madness drag me down." Caroline stirred her cappuccino silently. Outside, a light rain was falling, and passers-by hurried about their business, sheltering under umbrellas. "I'm seeing a therapist," he continued, "trying to figure myself out, to understand why I let all this happen." "And why?" She looked up at him for the first time. "I guess I was afraid of getting old," he smiled sadly. "You know how it is. You live your life, and suddenly you realize that your youth is gone. You want thrills, confirmation of your attractiveness. Stupid, isn't it?" "It's not stupid," she shook her head. "It's human. It's just that the methods you chose weren't the most human," he finished for her. "Yes, I know. I ruined everything. But you know what the worst part is? I really loved you, and I still do. Love isn't just a feeling," she put down her empty cup. "It's also a choice. Every day, you choose one person, to be honest with them, to respect them. You made a different choice. Is it too late to change now?" "Yes, it is." She stood up. "You know, I'm grateful to you for those 6 years. They were good. But you can't change the past and the future. Everyone has their own now. Will you ever be able to forgive me?" "I already have," she smiled. "But that doesn't mean I want to go back. Some things just can't be put back together." He nodded, understanding. They left the coffee shop together but went their separate ways. The rain had almost stopped, and the spring sun was peeking through the clouds. A few days later, Caroline ran into Samantha, who had come for a job interview. She looked much better than when they first met. "I heard Delilah is in the clinic," she said. "She probably needed help for a long time. No one noticed the symptoms." "Or didn't want to notice," Caroline replied. "Sometimes it's easier to blame it on a difficult personality than to admit there's a real problem." They talked a little more about their lives, their work, their plans for the future. No one mentioned Brock or the past. All of that was now behind them, just a story that time would eventually erase from their memories. That evening, Caroline stood at the window of her office for a long time, looking out at the city lit up with lights. Somewhere out there, in one of the clinics, a woman whose madness had nearly destroyed several lives was being treated. Somewhere out there lived the man she had once loved. And here, in the hospital, was her real life, complicated, stressful, but full of meaning. An urgent call sounded in the hallway. Caroline threw on her robe with a practiced movement. Her patients were waiting for her. Life went on, and that was what mattered.